So we wrapped up Friday's show, Gator, and I got in my car in the parking lot of the building, and I looked down at my phone, and there's a text message that Juwan Howard, it'll be announced shortly that he is being replaced. I'm like,
He's been fired anyway.
Yep. And I was like, well, they're the timing. Couldn't talk about it on the air, and knew we had all weekend to sort of process it. I'll start with this. My interactions with Juwan were good. They weren't many, but they were good. And he is a Michigan legend. He was great as a player, and he's got a bit of a temper problem. That's something he might want to address. He also has health issues. The hardest part about this is, of course, that you have to replace a legend, and nobody likes what can happen here. And we've seen it in Detroit sports, and it's tough, but it had to be done given what was going on. But then there's the element of his health. And talking to people close to the situation, the idea that he had the option of sitting out this year after having a heart procedure. And it was talked about. He kind of slowly came back from that, and eventually kind of picking up, doing more and more. And he had the option of sitting out the year and just worried and focused on his health, in which case he'd probably still be the coach at Michigan. But he wanted to come back, and he wanted to coach his team. And then to the people that had to make this decision to tell him it's time to go is kind of the tough, harsh, bitter reality of this whole thing. It's just harsh. But
well, you certainly hope that his health issues are behind him, that the procedure did what the procedure was supposed to do, and that he can go on and not have to worry about this anymore. That would be fantastic if that's the case. But he chose to come back, and they had one of the worst records in the history of the program.
Yep.
And that's reason enough that you say, all right, enough's enough. We got to move on, because you couple that with last year, which wasn't all that great either. Missing the tournament 2 years in a row, that's not going to be good.
Well, last year, in retrospect, was actually worse.
Well, because they had talent.
They had 2 top 15 NBA draft picks and Hunter Dickinson, and they missed the tournament.
Exactly.
And he made a comment late in this season about how he was going to really dig in the offseason and get this thing fixed. And the only thing I was thinking, gosh, after last year and missing out, I would think that would have been appropriate to really dig in and get it fixed going into this year. But, we've talked about what led to his downfall. There was a number of things. And he has some things he needs to work on. Juwan Howard does. He's not.
Yeah. Oh, he had the incident with the Wisconsin coach, and then you've got the
clash.
Incident with the strength and conditioning coach, and
Yep.
and then reports of what's going on behind the scenes. They're very unfavorable, and all those would be plenty of reason to want to say, enough's enough. But then you tack on the 8-24 or whatever record it was this year.
You can get a lot away with yelling at people and being tough to work for when you're winning.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, right? He's got some things he can work on. They had to pull the trigger on this move, and they did. And now the what's next for University of Michigan basketball. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about how they want to approach the name, image, and likeness space and try to up the ante there for Michigan basketball. But there's a few names early on here that are starting to emerge. One of them is going to be a very coveted young coach at Florida Atlantic, Dusty May. Florida Atlantic, that's a team that went to the Final Four last year. Florida Atlantic went to the Final Four last year, and their coach is a Midwest guy. He's an Indiana guy. He was a manager on Bob Knight's, a student manager when Bob Knight was a coach there. He's a hardcore X's and O's. He's recruited this area from his time at Eastern Michigan, and he's got his team back in March Madness. They brought back everybody from last year's Final Four team, so it isn't a huge surprise that they made it back. It'd be interesting to see if they can go on another run, but he was a He is definitely a name that should be under consideration. And you're talking about a pure basketball guy, Dusty May, is that. Shaka Smart's name has emerged here, and he's an interesting candidate in that he crushed it at Virginia Commonwealth, was one of the hottest names in coaching, went to Texas and developed the reputation at Texas for getting teams into the tournament and promptly losing in the first round. That eventually cost him his job. I mean, he was let go after they made the tournament and got bounced in the first round again. He goes to Marquette, and he's killing it. He's absolutely killing it at Marquette. So the question is, Texas is a football-first school with, a brand name, but basketball doesn't come first at Texas. Would that preclude him? Would it not make sense to bring him into Michigan, or is it just coincidence that he struggled at Texas? Because maybe he's kind of that perfect mid-major, if you will, coach that can kill it in those environments, is one name to consider. I know that people mention the name John Beilein. Could John Beilein actually be a candidate? Yeah, he could. He is 71 years old. And the things that drove John Beilein out of the game of basketball are worse now than they were when he was the head coach. But in a lot of people's eyes, and understandably so, he was like the perfect Michigan basketball coach. And I've talked about the frustration of the Iggy Brezdeikis, Jordan Poole era, where those guys bolted just when they were getting it up and running, and he had put in way more time recruiting them than he actually spent coaching them. And then a huge offer came along, and he said, "That's fine, I'm out." Well, now with the portal, the turnover is, I mean, it's you're season to season.
Yeah.
And I think Beilein likes to recruit, develop, build, and it's harder to do now than it was when he was a coach before.
I would imagine that today's college basketball for big programs, it shouldn't be too different than what it was 10 years ago if you're recruiting the one and dones, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're always having to look to change your roster. If you recruit high-end players, they're usually gone after a year, so you're constantly having to do that. With the portal now, it has really leveled the playing field and because basketball is different than football. Basketball, you got 300 and some teams are competing in Division I basketball. Mm-hmm. And you can get noticed. If you're good enough, you'll get noticed. Look at the draft and see where some of these guys are drafted from. It's not all Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina. And you can make a name for yourself. And what players are looking to do now is maybe make the name for themselves at the smaller school and then transfer and go to a bigger school and then really get the name recognition and see what you can do. A team like Michigan, if they make the right hire, or any program that's, a bigger program, because of the portal rules, you can really hit the ground running. And every day there are more and more players entering the portal. You look at we get these through Twitter. You get updates all the time, and like, oh, hey, here's this guy who averaged 16 points and 6 rebounds a game, and he's a sophomore eligible and all this. And like, okay, well, that's a player you got to keep in mind. And when the spring semester is over with, there's going to be a ton more. Or when the tournament's over with, you're going to see a ton more players entering the portal. It's not something where you have to rebuild the program. You can turn it over overnight.
But does John Beilein and his formula?
I don't think that's.
I have my questions because in so many ways, Beilein was like perfect for Michigan, but the game has changed, and at 71, is he change his style?
Well, look at Michigan State, and I love Tom Izzo, but has the game changed even for Izzo? Izzo is the kind of guy that gets his hands on you. You stay for 4 years. By the time you're a senior, you'll be a much different player than when you entered there. You may not be a star player, but you will show a massive improvement and be that team-oriented guy that is great for the college game, but maybe not necessarily great for developing professional players. Today, it's about instant gratification. You got to have it right here, got to have it right now. And if you're not getting the playing time, then you risk losing that guy. So I wouldn't think that Beilein's the right guy for today's college basketball landscape. And they'll have plenty of opportunities to go ahead because it is Michigan. Even though it's not one of the blue blood college basketball programs, it's still a really good. It's a massive name brand that you should be able to get a really good coach.
Other names, keep an eye on TJ Otzelberger from Iowa State. He's got that program humming. Nico Medved from Colorado State, familiar face for people who follow Michigan basketball because he had that Colorado State team the last time Michigan made March Madness that Michigan opened up with. He is getting a lot of buzz now as well.